On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
Bagdad, 21 août dernier. Alerte maximum à l'ambassade de France.
That's the sound from a 2007 documentary about the Embassy of France building in Baghdad, Iraq. A high-ranking French minister was paying a visit at the time on a crucial diplomatic mission, not long after the U.S.-led war on Iraq toppled dictator Saddam Hussein, on the pretext that Iraq was stockpiling weapons of mass destruction and supporting al-Qaeda. But Montrealer Philip Khazzam likes to watch the video for a different reason, because it gives him a glimpse inside the building which his family calls Beit Lawee. The embassy is using the mansion built by his grandfather Ezra and great-uncle Khedouri in 1935. The two brothers owned the General Motors franchise in the region and were wealthy pillars of Iraq's historic Jewish community. But after a 1941 pogrom called the Farhud killed nearly 200 Iraqi Jews, the Lawee family decided to flee, along with most of the country's Jewish community, amidst widespread support there for Hitler's Nazi policies during the Second World War and later hatred for the new state of Israel and its expulsion of Palestinians. While about 150,000 Iraqis were lifted to Israel during a special rescue mission in 1951, the Lawees settled in North America and arrived in Montreal in 1953. Their Baghdad house was eventually rented to the French government as an embassy, but after Hussein's party took power in 1968, the rent check stopped coming. Instead, the Iraqi regime took the money, and it still collects the rent to this day, even though Philip Khazzam says his family is still registered as the rightful owners. So he's suing France for over $30 million in unpaid rent and damages. And at the same time, he's trying to get his ancestral patrimony back in a case that's being closely watched by the descendants of the nearly 1 million Mizrahi and Sephardi Jews who were forced out of Arab lands.
It's my dream one day to go to Baghdad, and I'll have to wait it out till things quieten down, until this situation is resolved. But there's nothing I'd love more than to go to Baghdad and walk the streets where my parents walked, be in the house that my mother lived in.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Monday, July 7th, 2025. Welcome to North Star, the flagship news podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, and made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. When the Lawee family came to Montreal, they continued in the automobile business for many years, and some of you might remember Barnaby Motors in Saint Laurent. They also supported the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue. Philip Khazzam, Ezra's grandson, has never been to Baghdad. Actually, travel there's been out of the question, what with the first Saddam Hussein dictatorship and then the ISIS-Daesh caliphate a decade ago. In fact, Canada still has an urgent travel advisory against going to Iraq. But in truth, no one in the family wants to get the house back to live in it. That part of their family's Iraq story is over. But he is suing France for using stolen Jewish property these last 50 years. Philip Khazzam joins me now with the latest on his landmark case. It's good to meet you.
Thank you very much, Ellen.
Your family's saga goes to many different countries, including exile, including migration. Let's just give our listeners a little bit of background on how you ended up in Montreal and where your family came to be in Baghdad.
Well, I think our family history goes back really. We're from Babylon, basically, Baghdad. And our history starts back about 2,600 years. And we've always been in Baghdad until the I would say, the early 50s, when basically pretty much everyone had left in our family.
Maybe talk a little bit about the conditions with which your family ended up having to leave.
Till the 1930s, with the influence, there was the influence of Hitler, and that was, of course, very negative for the Jews in Baghdad. And I think they had a pretty peaceful life. They lived amongst Muslims and Christians, but unfortunately, things turned bad. There were pogroms, and eventually they had no choice but to consider leaving because the conditions were very, very difficult. And in 1951, you had the mass exodus of the Jews, and most of them did go to Israel. Some who were fortunate to be perhaps in a better financial situation had the opportunity to go to other countries. So my grandfather and his brother and the kids moved to New York actually for a couple of years, hoping to get their papers for New York. Eventually, they gave up. They were waiting too long, and they decided to come to Montreal.
Beit Lawee, or the House of Lawee. How many years did it take to build? Do you know who the architect was? Like, how did they get this idea to build this beautiful mansion?
I believe they chose a French architect. They probably started in 1935, and it was completed in 1937. They had a nice life there. There was a country club right next to the house, but where they had tennis courts, and my mother used to go and walk over with her racket and go and play at the country club.
It had beautiful formal gardens.
Yes, I mean, they had fountains and gardens, and my mother, I believe they even had a mango tree there, and my mother, my mother and her father loved mango. It was just a very, very nice life. And I guess ultimately, my grandfather realized that he had to leave at some point, and thank God that he was able to have one of the people who was working with him take care of the property. And he had the opportunity to reply to the tender for a embassy in French embassy in Baghdad, and fortunately, we got it.
So, how did the idea come to you? And when did this idea start in your family that this wasn't right?
In 1971, when Saddam's regime had advised the French to stop paying our family and to pay the government, we were somehow eventually notified of that. And there was a cousin of mine that had written to the French government, to the Foreign Office, and wanted to know, what's going on with the property. We had received money, I think, for 1 year. And then it just all of a sudden stopped. It's probably at that time that he wrote to the government and never got a reply. I would say from 1971, 72 till literally 2004, there was really no movement on the part of my family. I think they realized that they did not have any chances whatsoever. And of course, there was the wars with Israel, the Six-Day War, and it just became very, very difficult to try to resolve anything with anybody. So in 2004, my uncle Meyer had approached Lucien Bouchard, who was a lawyer at that time in Montreal,
Former Premier of Quebec, yes.
and asked him to send a letter to the French Foreign Ministry, which he did, and he did not get a reply. So again, it was a lost opportunity, and it was the best opportunity because the US had basically invaded Iraq, and we now had foreign powers that had influence in Iraq, and it would have been the right time to go in and do something. And unfortunately, we had not taken that opportunity, or we had not pushed hard enough. I guess we just didn't know what to do. Around 2010, for some reason, it got into my head that something should be done. I should really look into this. I understood that Iraqi property was relatively expensive, or there was a value to it. And I decided, oh, I'm going to look into this. I remember one day I decided to call a real estate office in Baghdad, a real estate company in Baghdad. Actually, they're builders. And I spoke to a gentleman who answered the phone, and I said, I'm just would like to ask you a couple of questions about the French embassy in Baghdad. And his reaction was quite strong. He said, "Is this a joke?" I said, "It's no joke. I'm just interested in this." And I told him who I was, and he said, 6 years ago, I was in charge of renovating the house.
So all these signposts along the way are giving you somebody's nudging you that this is the right thing for you to do, right?
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
Do you want to say how much it's worth now?
I believe it's worth 27 million. However, I think today it's much more. There is a lack of space in Baghdad, a lack of land in Baghdad. Embassies in Baghdad are having a terrible time trying to deal with increases in rents. And also, they have nowhere to go. There's not a lot of places to go. So it's a very important real estate right now.
Who are you doing this for, Philip?
The real reason, actually, that I decided to do this is in 2020, I realized that this is not just about a property. It's really about human rights. And that's why I went for it. I had a father who was extremely principled to a fault, sometimes to his detriment. He always wanted to do himself the right thing, and he appreciated when people did the right thing. And uh, I saw such an injustice, and I felt it's just not right.
Would you be okay if they continue using it as an embassy? There's no talk of you getting it back as your family home, right? Or is there?
No. Um, at this point, our family would like to sell the property. The majority of the family is in their 70s and 80s. So I think it's time. And of course, we are looking to get back rent for 50 years from the French government.
In this climate where it's not that friendly to Jews in Arabic countries, what has the reaction been that you're aware of? Has there been support or pushback?
This is a case of personal property that was stolen from us, a little bit like Nazi art. And if we are going to talk about the Palestinian issue, I'm only saying that's got nothing to do with it. It's apples and oranges. This is personal property. It's a difficult issue, of course, which I'm not getting into, but that's a difficult issue. There's also an issue of unjust enrichment. The French government is paying a very, very low rent to the Iraqi government because many of the Jewish properties were left basically empty. And there are people from the government or other people that end up being in charge of that property, renting it out to people, keeping a little bit for themselves. And they don't rent it for much because there's no cost base to it. They got property for free.
So our listeners will be more familiar with the reparations that, for example, Germany and other European Nazi-occupied countries paid, whether it's artwork, for example, or other things that the occupied countries, took from the Jews when they fled, and that is very familiar to many diaspora Jews. But in terms of the Middle East and North African countries who were also expelled and lost everything, That is a less well-known story. How do you feel that your claim and your lawsuit might encourage more awareness and other people may be following suit?
Well, that was one of the purposes of what I was doing. I felt that we had an opportunity to receive compensation for our property, which might help other Jews in other Middle Eastern countries receive some sort of compensation. A study's being done, and the results are out for two countries. Basically, a study to see what were the losses by Jews in Middle Eastern countries. Egypt was the first one of totaled in today's dollars 80 billion. Iraq was the second country, and that was 34 billion. I I think in total it's 200 billion, something like that, for all the different 10 or 11 countries in the Middle East where the Jews had to leave. So it's pretty significant. I do wish to say that I have a acquaintance in Baghdad that I speak to, and he's of the belief there are many, many people in Baghdad that realize, acknowledge, accept, and are proud that Jews were a part of that society. And even though there's only 3 Jews today in Baghdad, they are actually renovating and putting back into order a synagogue in Baghdad. 4 or 5 years ago, this would never, ever, ever happen.
There are little springs of hope in a society that's disappeared. Lastly, I wanted to ask you about the challenges. What challenges have pursuing this case posed to you personally?
Financially, it hasn't been difficult because we are a large family and the majority of our family has contributed. However, time-wise, it has. I run a business in Montreal, and I've had to try and do everything together, and it's difficult. And I should also say that I'm in the nut business. I import nuts and dried fruits, and I have three wonderful, wonderful Iraqi Muslim customers. We get along wonderfully. This is the way it should be. This is the way it started, and it's the way it should end. We should always be able to live amongst different religions. We're from the same countries. We're from the same people, really.
Your family, so it would be Khedouri and your grandfather, Ezra, bought houses in Montreal on Cedar Avenue side by side, right? Or built them.
Yes, that's correct. And they did that with their house in Baghdad in mind. In fact, I saw the banisters at the French embassy in one of the videos from one of the French TV stations, and I just couldn't believe it. It was exactly the same banister as my grandparents' house.
And the columns in the front door seem to be reminiscent of what he left behind.
Oh, of course, absolutely. And isn't it interesting that they built almost adjoining homes to replicate the fact that they lived together in that one house in Baghdad?
Is there any one final thing that you want our listeners and viewers to understand about why you're doing this?
Baghdad needs to do something for us because the house is now frozen. It needs to be unfrozen. We are not able to sell it, rent it. We're not able to do anything. We have no control over that house till Baghdad unfreezes the house. And it's at least a 2-year process with lawyers and very difficult. And there have been Christian homes and properties that have been unfrozen in the last few years. And we hope that ours will be unfrozen as well.
Because the old regime, the Ba'ath regime, when they took power, they froze it under Saddam Hussein.
And interestingly enough, all these properties are still in the names of the owners, of the Jewish owners. These properties have not been expropriated. They've been frozen.
That's good for you.
So France has had that opportunity, but they've chosen to ignore us. Why? That's the question. I should also mention that they are the government, they are the country with the most pull in Iraq. No one has invested more than France into Iraq. In fact, Total Energy has invested $27 billion building the infrastructure for oil movements, etc., oil production. France very easily could resolve this. In really, it would take perhaps a phone call. So this is something I don't understand.
It's been an honor to hear your story. I really, really appreciate you giving me the time.
Thank you very, very much. I much appreciate the opportunity.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of North Star, made possible thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. A deadline of May 15th to try to settle the case through mediation has come and gone. So Philip Khazzam waits for the French government to set a court date. He isn't the first Montrealer whose family was expelled from Arab lands who's tried to get a symbolic court victory. The late Raphael Biggio sued Coca-Cola unsuccessfully in an American court for taking over his family's ancestral lands in Cairo. Our show was produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman and Andrea Varsany. Our executive producer is Michael Freeman, and the music is by Brett Higgins. Thanks for listening.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, Not Long Ago, Not Far Away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.